Call to order the Plan Commission meeting of February 23, 2021. We'll proceed with roll call.
Mr. Foster?
Here.
Mr. Holman?
Here.
Mr. Coots? Ms. Lazaris?
Here.
Mr. Magnuson? Is he online?
He's online.
He's online.
Mr. Magnuson?
Wayne, you have to unmute. Unmute yourself.
Can you see him so he could signify at least?
He doesn't have a camera on either.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'll move on with the roll call to
Yeah.
Mr. Grady.
That'll be fine.
Mr. Magnuson, can you respond yet? How would you like to proceed?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and proceed then. All right,
Okay.
thank you. All right. The next item number 3, correction and/or approval of the special meeting minutes of December 8. Is there a motion concerning the December 8 minutes?
Motion to approve the December 8 minutes.
Was that Ryan Grady?
That's right.
Mr. Grady moved. Is there a second?
Second.
And Mr. Holman seconded. Any discussion? And then we'll go ahead with the roll call vote on the minutes.
Mr. Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Coots?
Abstain.
Ms. Lazaris?
Aye.
Mr. Magnuson? Still not able to respond. Mr. Grady? Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Motion passed.
All right, thank you. Next up, item number 4, questions and public comment. The public may address the commission at this time regarding items on the agenda unless the item is the subject of a public hearing. If your comments pertain to a public hearing, please hold your comments until the hearing. We do have 2 public hearings this evening. Item number 5, conditional use request by the Comperes for an alternative vegetative cutting plan and slope grading on a slope greater than 20% at 304 Lakeshore Drive. And item number 7, conditional use request by the Cedars Management Corporation for an alternative vegetative cutting plan and for slope grading on a slope greater than 20% at the Cedars, as set forth on the recorded plat of Lake Park Place. Public comment may also be made at this time on items that are not on the agenda if you have registered in advance with the city clerk. The state's open meeting law discourages action by the commission on items not listed on the agenda. Please keep comments at this time to 3 minutes. State your name and address when stating your comments. Fill out the sign-in sheet at the podium. For people online, please type your name and address in the chat feature. Are there public comments at this time? Anyone commenting online? Hearing none? Hearing none, we'll go on to item number 5, public hearing. Conditional use request from Kenneth and Audrey Compere for an alternative vegetative cutting plan to exceed the 26-foot limit under the current Shoreline Preservation vegetative buffer requirements and for the purpose of filling and grading on a slope greater than 20% within 300 feet of the high water mark at the ordinary high water mark at 304 Lakeshore Drive, Lake Mills, parcel 246071311433025. At this time, before I ask for testimony, I would like to ask for a report on this case, on this request, by consulting City Planner Dustin Wolf, who I understand is online. Are you available, Mr. Wolf?
I am, Ms. Lazarus.
Okay, wonderful. And we also have with us this evening, before Mr. Wolf gets started, we have Brian Carranza, who is a landscape architect with Beeden Hunt, who is here to for questions pertaining to landscape. So, but we'll proceed now. Mr. Wolf, if you would give an overview of this request concerning the Comperes.
Okay, thank you very much. I am going to give a brief introduction of this and kind of the focus of what the hearing is. Brian Carranza will provide details on the specifics to the site plan. As you indicated in the notification for this, the focus here is on an alternative cutting plan that deviates from what is specifically outlined in section 660-34 of the zoning code, which is shoreline preservation and vision and access corridor. And then, as you noted, for filling, grading, dredging, or excavating in the shoreline area, which is on the steep slope. So the zoning code spells out what the vision and access corridor should be, and it limits the amount of clearing or trimming of trees or removal of trees and vegetation for the health of the shoreline and the aesthetics of the shoreline. The thing that we are not going to be focusing on is the improvements that have been previously made for this project or this site relating to this project, as that is clearly outlined where the vision corridor is and where those improvements are allowed to be, and those were previously approved by the city under the code we have in place. The issue that we have now is, and there were a number of these over the course of the summer that were brought to the attention of the city, where property owners, apparently home a lot last summer, were deciding to make improvements or clearing or cleaning of their shoreline to enhance views or remove scrub or invasive species. There was some extensive clearing that was done on sites along the lakeshore. The Compere property is one of those in questions. Because the amount of removal was greater than was allowed by the zoning code specifically, we need to venture into the section that allows for an alternative cutting plan. So additional vegetation or cutting, removal or cutting of trees is permitted, but a part of that process is, of course, permission is supposed to be granted by the city in advance of that removal in accordance with an approved plan. The focus here, of course, is on removing invasive species and ensuring the health of the shoreline to ensure that we don't have erosion issues, sedimentation issues that are occurring in the lake itself. Unfortunately, and this is not uncommon with lake property owners, they did not come to the city first to discuss their removal of vegetation and to improve their shoreline. Merely removal occurred and was brought to the attention of the city. Brian Carranza has worked with the city as a whole, but Brian Carranza specifically has worked with the property owners on identifying what an alternative cutting plan and planting plan, so remediating the shoreline plan, will be for this site. In essence, that is the focus tonight of the public hearings. It is a plan being brought forward that achieves the goal of the zoning code as it relates to the shoreline, and for, in this case, the grading and or excavating of that steep slope which is the shoreline itself. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. Brian can run through kind of the details of the plantings and such, but these are challenging sites. We have this one and another one yet tonight, and there will be others coming forward in the future, because there is a lot of invasive species out there. It isn't that we don't want to see improvements on the shoreline, but of course there is balancing what is best for the lake and the shoreline, and what in the community, and what is best for a specific property owner. So with that, I'm going to ask Brian to kind of walk through the plan that is being proposed, and how it does comply with our code requirements or for the alternative cutting plan and grading.
Thanks, Dustin. So I'll try to project as much as I can for you guys. Ultimately, as Dustin alluded to, we've got two factors at play here: the alternative vegetative cutting plan and then the grading, excavation, etc. Conditional use. As it pertains to the alternative vegetative cutting plan, what's under review is really three tenets. The first being, does it preserve the scenic characteristics of the shoreline? Second being, does it preserve and protect the erosion control components of the shoreline? And then the third being, does it shield structures and kind of the man-made features on the shoreline from the water? And that screening is important, again, for the public use of the lake and making sure the shoreline is maintaining that standard. So as far as the planting plan, the petitioner did work with city staff and their recommendations as we went through this to determine appropriate plants. They did change their plant palette to focus more on regional natives that maintain the root structure necessary to preserve that shoreline from erosion. And then as far as the plants themselves, they again have the massing and characteristics necessary to provide shielding. And then the third component being the erosion control again. Both the root structure itself, but also the retaining walls on site. So pertaining to the retaining wall, just to touch on that briefly, the one on the top of the slope will go in front of the council for a privilege in the street application. And that's for basically 1 foot tall wall. The one on the downslope, essentially, one of the recommendations or concerns of staff was that whether by bringing the retaining wall back, it would increase the slope there. So one of the conditions that we do recommend as part of this approval with conditions would be to make the wall at the appropriate height to maintain the existing slope or to improve upon it. And in concert with the vegetation that has been proposed here, we feel that that will stabilize the shore from the erosion and the potential impacts there. And then, of course, the traditional conditional use considerations out there related to the comprehensive plan, et cetera. I won't go into too much detail there, but they are provided for you within the background.
Thank you, Mr. Carranza. The public hearing is open. There was an individual in the neighborhood who contacted me and cannot be here. And this is from Robert Imperial, a neighbor of the Comperes. And he states that his home is approximately 80 feet north of subject property on Lakeshore Drive. I am familiar with Mr. and Mrs. Compere's request and have reviewed the plans for the project, and I am in support of their request. I will not be able to attend the hearing, but ask that you share my support with the other members of the Plan Commission. This is from Bob Imperial. The public hearing is open. Is there anyone who wishes to comment about the Compere's request? Thank you. Please come up to the podium and write your name and address, and also state your name and address for the clerk.
My name is Kenneth and Audrey Compere, and I just wanted to thank the commission for giving me the time, because it originally came up in your August meeting. And working with the city. Maybe I was confused on the initial comments by Dustin that there had been some cutting on our property prior to this that wasn't approved, and that's not the case. Our neighbors cut their lot just to the north of us without approval, I believe.
That was the phase, you are correct.
And it was not, ours has not been cut whatsoever. We've been going through the process to get this before you in a format that hopefully you'll be happy with, and I appreciate everyone's consideration and help. And unless anyone has any questions for me, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Compere. The public hearing is open. Would anyone else like to speak to this request? Yes, and again, please write your name and address and state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm John Cody. I live at N6662 Shoreline Hills Road. I used to live right next to the funeral home. I've been a resident of Lake Mills for over 30 years. I'm here speaking on behalf of the Rock Lake Improvement Association. I'm a board member of the association. We have 120 members. Almost all of them live either in the city of Lake Mills or the township of Lake Mills. Many of them are lakeshore residents. One of our members participated in shoreline restoration through the Healthy Lakes Grants Program offered through the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and sponsored by the county, in this case Jefferson County. This member stressed to me that successful native plantings depend on density and size of the plants which are planted. Since the plantings play a critical role in preventing erosion in the Compere CUP, the homeowner should be required to plant at a higher density so that the plantings will reach maturity quickly to contain erosion. The plan should also include layers of plantings so that soil is ultimately covered by plants rather than by mulch or open soil, which could find its way into the lake. Consequently, ground cover sedges should be planted under and in between the shrubs. We would also like the property owner to consider a vegetative retaining wall at the lower retaining wall in lieu of a masonry retaining wall as is proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zodi. The public hearing is continuing. Would anyone else like to speak to this request? Again, please write your name and address and then speak your name and address for the record.
My name is Mike Niesman. I reside at 113 South Ferry Drive. I'm here as a citizen of Lake Mills, but also RLIA board officer. And support what John said, I would also just raise some questions. We have spent hours and a fair amount of money trying to tear out the invasive species that our predecessors had planted to control erosion, crown vetch and the like. I can tell you that when you plant native plants, they don't all grow. At least they don't grow when I plant them. So I think what you said, my question would be, what is the mechanism for follow-up? It's all well and good, and I believe everybody, and I think this would hold true for the Cedars folks too. Everybody wants to do the right thing, but they may not know it. Is there a mechanism for a year from now to say, not enough, this isn't growing, those milkweeds aren't doing the job, you need to plant more? And I doubt this would happen, but is there a mechanism to enforce that? Or in other words, once the CUP or C, whatever it is authorized, end of story, they say, yes, we'll do it, and then that's it. So I'd like to commend the committee that there needs to be some follow-up here, and to landowners that it's not just a matter of planting. You have to keep at it, and it takes years for these things to grow. And it's important because that strip of shoreline is the key to the lake for fish spawning, for the mammals, for the amphibians. And you might say, well, who cares about a soft, spiny shell Sure. Well, I don't know. You knocked one spoke out of the wheel. What else is affected? And that's why sometimes these retaining walls and this riprap, no term's going to get over that. I'm not sure about frogs or other things either. So I would ask that everyone consider it. It's not a bathtub you fill with water and drive your boat on. It's a living ecosystem. And you bugger up one section, you're asking for trouble. So thank you. I'll fill this in now.
All right, thank you.
I can just address the ongoing component to this.
Right. I thank you, Mr. Neesmith. Yeah, Mr. Carranza.
Sure. One of the conditions that is outlined is for filter fabric to be placed on the slope until the plants are established at a maturity. And that provides, some protection from the soil. It's got to be staked down. And then obviously if they don't reach maturity, then, that protection will remain. So as far as that consideration, that is certainly part of the conditions.
All right, thank you. The public hearing is open. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the Compere's proposal?
I know that Patricia Cicero put her name and address in there. I don't know if she wants to speak or not.
All right, Ms. Cicero, Mr. Foster is wondering if you wish to speak to the Compere proposal.
I do.
All right, go ahead.
So I'm Patricia Cicero. I'm the director of the Jefferson County Land and Water Conservation Department, and I live at 517 College Street in the city. I'm here today to give testimony to provide information on how best to protect Rock Lake from disturbances on parcels adjacent to the lake. I understand that the variance issued for this property allowed expansion of the vision and access corridor to allow for the retaining wall and patio. I understand that some of the land and existing vegetation will be disturbed and therefore must be replanted because of building the patio and the retaining wall. In addition, there might be some areas that are not going to be disturbed, but the plan is to remove invasive species and replant with more suitable species. The city's code that addresses an alternative cutting plan stipulates that existing vegetation should be listed in the conditional use application. I did not see this list and therefore do not know if they are proposing to remove any native plants. Therefore, I request that a list of existing species be provided. And if there are any native species on that list, then I would advocate that those species should not be removed. Native species are important because they have extensive root systems that will protect the land from erosion and thus protect the lake. They provide more benefits to other native species that use the land and water than non-native species do. I also have a concern about the density of the plants proposed and whether they will provide enough erosion control. My other concern is that the plan contains a lot of shrubs and that there will be bare ground under them. On steep slopes, it is my opinion that more flowers and grasses are recommended to have a better erosion control. I also want to offer that in addition to rock retaining walls, like was stated before, there are options that exist to have retaining walls made out of geotextile bags that are then planted to provide a more natural look. One of the advantages of these types of walls is that they will move with the freeze-thaw cycles, whereas block walls may be negatively impacted by the freeze-thaw cycle. I'm happy to provide that information to the landowners who I've talked to in the past. Erosion control will be very important on this site because it is steep as well as adjacent to the lake. Erosion control, such as a silt fence, should be properly installed adjacent to the shoreline rock riprap prior to any disturbance to the site. Furthermore, the erosion control should be inspected and maintained until the project has been completed and all bare soil is covered with mulch or landscaping fabric. So that inspection and maintenance would be done by whatever contractor would do the job. So thank you for listening.
All right, thank you, Ms. Cicero. The public hearing is open. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak regarding the Compere request? Is there any further testimony regarding the Compere request? Does anyone else wish to speak concerning this conditional use request? Yes, please approach the podium.
We're having difficulty hearing what you're asking.
All right. I'm asking if there's anyone else who wishes to speak during this public hearing concerning the Compere request. All right, hearing none, we're going on to item number 6. Discussion recommendation on conditional use request from Kenneth and Audrey Compere for the purpose of an alternative vegetative cutting plan to exceed the 26-foot limit under the current Shoreline Preservation vegetative buffer requirements, and for the purpose of filling and grading on a slope greater than 20% within 100 feet of the ordinary high water mark at 304 Lakeshore Drive, parcel 246071311433025. Plan Commissioners, we do have a prepared motion concerning this request, which also will cover the planner's recommendation and their conditions for their recommendation. But this is Plan Commission Motion 21-1, Compere 304 Lakeshore Drive, conditional use permit for alternative shoreline vegetative cutting plan, and conditional use permit for grading within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark. This motion sets forth the city's zoning authority under Wisconsin state statutes. The city's zoning code 66034 regarding the shoreline preservation and vision access corridor, the November 4, 2020 variance that was decided by the Lake Mills Zoning Board of Appeals to extend the allowed width of the vision and access corridor. The application of City Zoning Code 66035 on filling, grading, lagooning, dredging, ditching, and excavating permitting for any grading within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark. The conditional use being requested under Section 66034B4 to allow an alternative vegetative cutting plan for shoreline vegetation replanting and remediation. The conditional use requested under Section 66035B to allow for grading at a slope of 20% or more within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark. The review by city staff, tonight's public hearing, and Plan Commission review. This motion does provide for a Plan Commission recommendation to the City Council to grant the requested conditional use permits for the alternative shoreline cutting plan and for grading of a shoreline slope at or exceeding 20% within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark, subject to the following conditions. 1, follow the recommendations and conditions outlined in the planner's memo. 2, compliance with all applicable state law, administrative code, and local ordinances. The conditions outlined in the planner's memo for A, Alternative Vegetative Cutting Plan. Landscape fabric designed for erosion control is placed on disturbed soil until the plantings establish appropriate ground coverage. Part B, filling, grading, lagooning, dredging, ditching, and excavating. 1. The smallest amount of bare ground shall be exposed for a shorter time as feasible. Erosion control measures outlined in 660-143 shall be followed. 2. Temporary ground cover shall be used and permanent cover shall be planted. 3. Diversion, silting basins, terraces, and other methods shall be used to trap sediment. 4. Fill should be stabilized according to accepted engineering standards. 5. Fill should not restrict a floodway or destroy the storage capacity of a floodplain. 6. Additional technical requirements and conditions recommended by the city engineer and/or public works staff. 7. Construct the downslope retaining wall at a height to maintain or improve upon the existing slope. 8. Approval of privilege in the street application. Well, that is, commissioners, that is the prepared motion 2121. Are there any questions, comments concerning the prepared motion or the request? Any questions of staff?
So everything I see in there, and everything that we have, or people have talked about already, it looks like the staff has gone through and said the plan that's been presented is all acceptable. I'm not seeing anything in here, and I didn't see anything in here that actually raises huge red flags based on current laws and regulations. And it does look like most of the proposals, or all of them here, result in undue adverse impact on the neighborhood, the character, and the protection of the lake overall. But the only thing I'm not seeing in here is something that was brought up earlier. And when we look for these conditional uses, a lot of times we will put in a recommendation that we go back and look at them in a year time and do recommendations if things are not working out the way they are supposed to. So I'm assuming we can make some of that in this motion, to add that in there, do an amendment, to add something like that in there, to have our staff planners do the review within a year and make recommendations if things aren't working the way they're supposed to. Is that a good statement, or?
I would agree with that. I think over the course of years, there's been many times in conditional use applications where Plan Commission members have been apprehensive on voting, but it's always been, by definition, a use based on conditions. So I think that's a fair statement, what you said.
Yeah. The other thing that was brought up is the use of some other type of material besides hardscape for the lower, what are we calling it there? I'm sorry, I get the right words here. The retaining wall, there you go. I knew somebody would get me on the right direction here. So having looked at that and hearing what I've heard from Ms. Cicero and some of the other folks here, I I can't find any laws that say you have to do it one way or the other. It just has to be approved as drawn, unless I'm wrong. I'm not sure if we've run into issues like this before, where we've put retaining walls there and it's caused big issues, and the thawing and freezing has caused it to become unsightly and redo it within a couple of years. I'm just not familiar with the new product that Ms. Cicero mentioned, and whether or not that would cause an undue burden on the homeowners if they have to change their plans and try to go with something else. Yep, go ahead.
I think that's exactly the concern. It's the property has certainly been willing to work with the city on finding something that is kind of effective. The fieldstone being proposed was to give it a little more, I'll say, quote unquote, natural appeal to it. The timbers just didn't work because over time they just erode too quickly. That's not to say there aren't other products out there that could be explored, but the question mark becomes, what is the cost associated with them to the property owner? And at this point, if you're going to say he must evaluate something else, what's the threshold by which he has to use it versus doesn't have to use it?
Right.
Putting grasses into the stone, which is some of the things that Brian Carran's had worked with them on to soften the edges. There's not going to be anything perfect out there. These are very steep slopes. It's a challenge here. This is a very different area than other areas of the lake where you have some depth to the road or into private property. This only has very limited depth. It is 20+% the entire way up. So it's not, I don't think that people aren't willing to do it. I don't think we have a good portfolio of alternative product and or an understanding of the cost or burden to the property owner in using them.
Yeah, and that's why I brought it up. That's one of my concerns, because the more that we push them to other things when there's nothing legally truly saying you have to and you must do it this way with this product, it puts us in sort of a bind, because we really can't do that unless something comes out and says we have to, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But if what they have in there is an approved solution based on the current regulations, I can't see forcing them to look at something else. Now, with the alternative planting, I did look at it, and it looks like they've got a really good coverage of that area with these plants. And like I mentioned earlier, if we put a stipulation in there that we go back in a year or whatever the case is, and review it to see how the stuff is growing and do other recommendations to keep the conditional use alive, I think we're doing our due diligence to make sure that undue either drainage or sloughing of the bluff or particles getting into the water. I think we're doing our part to make sure that that is not occurring as best as we can as a community, and that our constituents that live here can actually make use of their property is a big benefit. So I'll stop there.
Can I ask a question? We're talking about the armor along the shore rather than the retaining wall at the back of the boat, near the back of the boathouse?
No, they were talking about the retaining wall because there's already existing riprap on the shoreline.
Yep.
Okay, well, let's go back a little bit. There's a street with water and sewer and several other utilities in behind it. And that retaining wall, the way that's cut in there, that retaining wall is an important feature into stabilizing the street and those utilities. So I'm pretty sure your public works staff is going to make a recommendation that that wall be even a little bit taller and be a more solid material than rock. So from that standpoint, I think that they would really want to see what kind of material was being used and have a very strong interest, because they're out there shooting angles off the edge of the pavement already to trying to make sure that that pavement is stabilized and that we're not losing any water or sewer during construction projects.
Steve, I just want to clarify. You're talking about the upper retaining wall off the edge of the roadway. And then there's the lower retaining wall, which is also fieldstone. So you're talking about the upper retaining wall that is really off the edge of pavement, which is going to come back to the council at a later date.
That's the privilege in the street. This one we're talking about is the lower one, Steve. It may help it too, but it's not as...
I want to go back. When we looked at, the one we looked at, was there a privilege in the street? Because the one wall that we were measuring was 3 feet off the property line.
Yes, that will not be part of the privilege in the street. That's the one that's referenced in the memo as part of the conditions to raise the height to maintain the existing or improve on the slope. Addressing concerns from engineering and public service staff. If I could also just jump back and touch base on your thought of periodic review of the conditional use. Due to the nature of the plantings and the living nature of the plantings, it may be appropriate here to do consecutive review, perhaps for 2 years. Especially with plant material, 1 year may not be enough to ensure that it is established and that the growth is appropriate for the coverage that we're looking for. So just a consideration for you guys.
Okay, thank you. Did you get that, Steve?
About the 2-year extension?
No, about the first portion of it, talking about the upper retaining wall is what you're referring to still. And that'll come with the privilege in the street. I'm assuming that's going to come back to us for that piece. So right now, all we're discussing is the planting and the lower retaining wall, as far as I understand.
I'm pretty sure that the Public Works Board was looking at that, or the Public Works staff was looking at that one wall next to the door. So, Dwayne, you want to comment?
Sure, maybe I can clarify a little. The top wall is going to be a privilege in the street,
right,
and is of concern for the street as well. The lower wall, at least in this proposal, is at a minimum 3 feet off the property line. At that location, it is very close to future potential plans for reconstruction of Lakeshore Drive, which is still in the planning stages, early planning stages. It's in the capital improvement plan for 2028. The wall that's there now, that's being proposed, as Brian and Dustin have said, some of our recommendations have been to increase the wall height so that the slope off of the street is flatter than it is at this time. And we will further analyze that as we go into reconstruction of that street in the future. Does that help explain the situation of the lower wall?
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you right, we're looking at potential 7 years out, and a lot of things could change between now and then. Is there any reason to put the homeowner through this, to build it up higher and potentially make something that could be deemed unsightly to other folks because of potential work that we're going to do in the future? Or do we look at it as this is what we have right now, and if it goes into the future, we may have to relook at this thing as an overall process? Since it is a conditional access, it's not, by no means permanent, so things can change. So I'm just throwing that out there and see what comments I get back.
Permanent. They're not. Once in a while, every 20 or 30 years, they might come back and modify them a little bit. This is going to be a permanent fixture. The street will be replaced. We're hoping it makes 7 years out. I'm praying definitely that it makes it 7 years out, because this street is going to be a nightmare.
So let me ask you this then. What would happen with building that street in 7 years if no conditional use was applied and we told them, no, you can't build any of this stuff? What would happen then? How would that affect the road building?
We would probably come in and look at some type of retaining wall that we would construct at some point along the edge of the right-of-way. If we do this, we would not be able to construct that without tearing both those retaining walls out. So what Dwayne is looking at is saying, okay, what I want to do is do some calculations to figure out this is where this retaining wall needs to be built and how high it needs to be built. And then that allows us in the future to have easier construction at the point where we would be putting a retaining wall, or at least being able to use what's there. Because if we have to go in and dig it out, if you give them this conditional use permit, we're going to go dig it all out and rebuild it.
Well, that brings up the question then is, why was this not fully discussed before this conditional use ever came to the Plan Commission?
It has been.
There are no plans.
This item has been discussed at the staff level for the better part of 4 months. And that's the issue we have sitting out there is.
Yeah, I mean, you put us in a weird position here. Just because it looks to me like you couldn't figure it out. And now we have to figure it out and give you a plan based on what we're hearing.
It's the Plan Commission's job to figure it out. We're going to say, hey, this isn't the best idea, but this is the way we'd like to go.
Steve, it's your job to put together the options. And this was not put in there as an option for us. All we have is an alternative cutting plan and a plan to look at what they have in there now. So if there was going to be a plan to put in something for a retaining wall or make them do a bigger retaining wall, that should have been as an option into this plan for us. So that's.
Yes.
We discussed this item as something that should be discussed as part of this conditional use permit. Did we not?
We did. And
Okay.
Part of the conditions there.
Hold on, Brian still has a point to make, Steve.
All right.
Part of the conditions that are outlined in the staff memo are to address potential concerns from city engineering staff and public works staff, as well as improve the height of the wall to maintain the slope. So regarding the proposal itself, again, what's in front of us is the vegetative cutting plan and whether or not, it meets the 3 conditions that I've outlined earlier. And then the grading and drainage, that's effectively the how we do it to make sure that it preserves the shoreline itself. Now, part of that is obviously making sure that there aren't any adverse impacts to public, transportation and utility and other things. And that's the condition that's outlined there in the memo to make sure that public works staff and engineering staff can make their comments as part of that approval.
So Brian, so what you're saying, the proposed plan is adequate?
As outlined in the memo, yes, with, of course, input from staff as the memo.
Thank you.
Right. That's exactly what I was saying. We're being told it's adequate.
Yeah.
So why are we going into it now to look and say, okay, now we need to make it higher?
But we did mention it as the option to say, hey, it would be a good idea to at least consider that, making it higher.
Is that the 1 foot higher?
The downslope retaining wall to raise the height of that to maintain the existing slope or improve upon it. And the intentions there are, again, to help stabilize the shoreline in concert with the vegetation that's being proposed, and then to address any loading concerns. And Dwayne, you correct me if I'm wrong. There were some sort of conditions or consideration to that to date.
Yes, let me clarify a little bit. Some of the stipulations that we talked about when you put that last statement in the document was to increase the slope so that it was better than it was existing. The other stipulation, if you recall in our conversations, is what is shown on the plan is that the wall cannot be any closer than 3 feet from the right-of-way. Based on that information, for this interim time period, that wall should be out of the zone of the sewer and water facilities as far as support, and for the edge of the roadway as it is today. And initial evaluations that we've done in staff is that there is an existing boathouse that will control to some degree the location of the future curb that will be along Lakeshore Drive. By looking at where that curb would have to be to miss that boathouse, it will push that curb further to the east, which will then reduce the amount of loading that is occurring on the wall as long as it's 3 feet into the property owner's property. So our initial evaluation is that the wall that's being proposed will not affect the existing roadway as long as that slope is better than it was before the wall is put in.
So Dwayne, continue. So that means bringing it up at least about 1 foot.
Approximately 1 foot. Again, we're trusting the sketch that was provided by the applicant. And we would require, as staff, we would require that the grades would be shot exactly down the route and make sure that that slope is then flatter once that wall is put in. I would not want to put in and just say it has to be 1 foot higher than what is being shown, because the location of that on that such steep slope, the location of the right of way and that 3 foot off is very important and can affect that height of that wall dramatically.
Get the applicant back up here one more time, just to verify, they understand.
A motion it's been suggested that the applicant be available to answer questions. A motion to suspend the rules to allow it.
I'll make a motion to suspend the rules so we can verify with the applicant that he totally understands what we're talking about.
I will second it.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. Mr. Compere, please, for the questions they have.
So based on what you heard, do you fully understand what staff was talking about? And
I read carefully the staff report and listened to the discussion. I understand that, if we raise it up, it'll flatten out, and I have no problem with that.
So during your construction, you'll be willing to.
Right. My contractor, I think the 3 foot height, he's just looking at the site the way it is now, undisturbed, and that's kind of an estimate. So he's certainly not going to put the wall in and steepen the slope. I mean, if it's the requirement to actually raise the heights of the slope to be a little shallower, that's fine.
I guess I'm comfortable, with the applicant working with staff at the time, if that goes along with the comments based on staff recommendations.
I do want to make one thing clear, and Dwayne kind of made a statement that I don't think we fully discussed, was the way the statement reads in the memo is that it should be brought up so that the grade, the slope is no worse than it is now or better. So it was like, okay, so yeah, we're going to try and keep it at least as close as to what it is as possible. So Dwayne said, I think he missed a paragraph in there or a sentence in there that when he said we want to make it better, we want to make it no worse than what it is.
Yeah, it says construct a downslope retaining wall at a height to maintain or improve upon the existing slope.
And when I talked to the contractor that built the plan, that was our intention all along. He wasn't gonna, cut the slope. From what it is, he put the 3-foot dimension in because he thought that was about the height it would be to hold it the way it is now. If, we raise it a little higher and get a little shallower, that's perfectly doable, I'm sure.
I think that clears up a lot.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think so. Yeah.
The concern from staff was figure 6 in the memo, which appears to show that it's steeper. But that was the reason for the added statement in the memo.
It was also the reason for the vagueness in the memo, because we weren't exactly sure what we were going, but we wanted to make sure that we kept it as good, if not better, than what's there now.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Plan commissioners, are there any other comments or questions? Plan commissioners online, do you have any comments or questions?
I mean, it sounds like if we were to approve 21-2-1, there is still a conversation to be had with the engineers for the city. Is that right? About this? So we're going to be approving basically this, but with the exception that they would be working with the engineers down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, they'll be working with engineers. That's one of the conditions for this motion to continue.
I mean, I think that, it seems like Compere family, Mr. Carranza, it seems like there's been a great deal of respect for the community just by looking at this plan. And so I really want to thank them for this, because it seems like they've done really outstanding work. And I think there's, that's what we, in a community, there has to be a deal, some trust, right? And I hope that they listen to some of the environmental groups and some of their offerings as well, as they continue to move forward. Because I think there was some gems in there, but it seems like they've done a really good job.
All right, thank you. All right. All right, planning commissioners, are there any other comments or questions? And then we want to get back to Mr. Foster's suggestion, actually, about a review. Do you still wish to have that, Mr. Foster?
I do. I would like to make the amendment that it's reviewed annually for at least 2 years.
Okay.
To make sure that the growth is going according to plan.
Is that motion made?
Motion was made.
All right. Would it be all right to say staff shall conduct an annual review of the project area for a period of 2 years,
yep,
with the initial review being 12 months following commencement of work?
Sure.
All right, that would be condition number 3. Then
Make a motion to amend the motion.
we have to make a motion to
Mr.
amend.
Foster made the motion.
I made the motion.
I need a second.
All right, Mr. Foster did. Is there a second?
Second that motion.
Who made that second? Thank
Mr.
you.
Grady. Mr. Grady seconded the motion. Okay. Any discussion?
Yeah, if we've got another one of these coming up tonight and potentially more in the future, is the intent that we put the same condition in all of the shoreline conditional uses?
I would think it would be on a case-by-case basis, and certainly this is something that we can consider for the next case, but right now we're just going to focus on this one. It wouldn't be a blanket condition, but for this case, yes, this is what we're looking at.
It seems like because of the steepness of this and where it is on the street, there's a lot of factors that are involved than just the environmental concerns. There are a whole bunch of other concerns that I think make this particularly important. Is that right?
I think you're right. Yeah. All right. All right, Plan Commissioners, is there any further discussion? Well, did we voted on the amendment, or did we not? Okay. All right.
Who was the second?
The second was
Grady.
Mr. Grady
Mr. Grady.
on the amendment. All right, so we have a motion and a second to amend this motion 21-1 to add condition number 3, and that is staff shall conduct an annual review of the project area for a period of 2 years, with the initial review being done 12 months following commencement of work. Although, that's it. So with that, any further discussion? In this case, on this amendment, we'll proceed then with a roll call vote.
Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Ms. Lazarus?
Aye.
Mr. Magnuson? Looks still unavailable. Mr. Grady?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Holman?
Aye.
All right. Well, now we'll proceed with a vote on the amended motion 21-1. Is there a motion for the amended motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the motion as amended.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Coots.
Mr. Coots seconded.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? In that case, we'll proceed with a roll call vote.
Ms. Lazarus?
Aye.
Mr. Magnuson? Mr. Grady?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Coots? Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Motion passed.
All right. Next is item number 7, public hearing, conditional use request from Cedars Management Corporation for an alternative vegetative cutting plan to exceed the 30-foot limit under the current Shoreline Preservation vegetative buffer requirements, and for the purpose of filling and grading on a slope greater than 20% within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark in the city of Lake Mills at the Cedars as set forth on the recorded plat of Lake Park Place, city of Lake Mills, further identified by parcel numbers 2460713, 1441, 068, 2460713, 1441, 069, and 2460713, 1441, 080.
I need to excuse myself. I'm materially invested in this project.
All right, thank you, Mr. Holman. All right, now before we open the public hearing for testimony, I would like to call upon consulting planner Dustin Wolf and landscape designer Brian Carranza to provide an overview and discussion of this case. Mr. Wolf, would you like to start?
I will, thank you. This property is unique in the sense that the improvements were made on this site long before the city had the code in place it currently does that we've been discussing for the last, well, in this case, an hour on the Compere property. Right, so there are a number of improvements and pathways and such that have been made to this site. So it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison when you're talking about vision and access corridors and such, right? Because there are multiple structures out there, there are multiple paths out there and such. This site, there was shoreline stabilization work occurring that exceeded the thresholds that are allowed to happen without certain permits and approvals. And it was brought to the attention of the city. At that time, obviously, the city staff began working with the association out there to determine the best management of the site and the best practice and process for moving forward. So again, I just want to caution everybody that we can't just say that all of the vision and access corridor requirements that would apply to properties would apply specifically to this as well, because of these weren't improvements that were made anytime in the last decade, but made many decades ago before we had a code in place. Mr. Carranza can walk through some of the site inspection things he had and talk about kind of the plan that the staff is bringing forward or recommending be approved out there to meet the desired improvements associated with the zoning code for preservation of shoreline, mitigating any of the erosion issues out there, and such. So, Brian, if you want to talk about some of the details.
All right, everyone, this is Brian Carranza speaking again. As Dustin pointed out, this is a similar, on paper, similar situation on paper. However, in actual application, it's somewhat different, in part because of the site itself. There are a number of existing non-conforming uses on the site prior to the passing of the current shoreline preservation requirement. So, to that, I just want to point out that no vision and access corridor has ever been established for the property. There's a number of non-conforming structures, meaning boathouses on the site, as well as a myriad of pathways to access them, etc. And so that puts the code in an interesting situation, because we need to, as part of the permit approval, establish what that vision and access corridor truly is. And I'll touch on that in a moment. As far as what's in front of us today, it's the same three tenets. Was what's proposed meeting the condition of preserving the scenic beauty of the shoreline? Does it meet the erosion control conditions? Does it, again, shield the man-made structures, the man-made components of the shoreline from the lakeside, right? In the evaluating and working with the Cedars, the petitioners, I want to commend them. Certainly, the intention of preserving the shoreline here was there. The work that they did to date certainly does improve upon the erosion control that was previously on site. Obviously, they were addressing some soil loss and shoreline loss on site. To the other components, the other two components, the proposed landscaping plan unfortunately does not go far enough to meet the scenic beauty condition or the shielding of the structures, particularly by placing the riprap and the terrace walls there. You are impeding upon those two conditions. And so it's an interesting situation here, because we do have to think backwards and think more of what's going to be required from a restoration perspective. And so as part of this approval, we wanted to make sure staff to provide some guidance of what conditions should be approached to make sure that the scenic beauty and the shielding components are met, but not to go so far as to say you need to plant this plant here, right? So you'll see in the staff recommended remediation conceptualization an identification of the vision and access corridor, where that's going to be established as, what components lie within that vision and access corridor and what's appropriate there. The access to the non-conforming structures and uses that exist on site and what's appropriate here for that. And then as far as restoration, the massing, the types, the character of the plants that that we'd be looking for in a planting plan. And so one of the conditions would be for the petitioner to come back to staff with an appropriate planting plan, similar to the way the Comperes had provided more specifics in terms of the dimensions, the approximate height and location in their plan. So to that, again, the figure 12 that's in the staff memo does show a conceptualization, and with that, as well as the additional conditions that were provided in the staff memo, we do recommend approval, conditioned upon
I absolutely can.
We're looking for some explanation on section 660-195 and 2.
So on the board there, you can see the figure 12 that I was referencing, establishing the various programming elements that I'm talking about, the location of the vision access corridor, access to the common space basically on the site. So the staging area approaching the pier itself and the steps accessing that. The improved paths with the terracing, there will need to be some screening of that. And so we're proposing part of that is a vegetative area A, type A. It's approximately 2 to 3 foot tall vegetation to screen that in the front side. And allowing for a 5 foot wide pathway to be able to access the boathouse behind that. The intention here is also to maintain some of the improvements that were done, in part because it did provide a much greater condition for the erosion control component here. And then behind that wall, also working up the slope to provide, again, similar density and massing for the plantings. And then above there, there's also an existing pathway. There will be some restoration needed for the soil because there is a pathway that was previous to the one that's on the east side that's proposed, that it has been improved. And so that can be something like seeding and low-lying ground cover, something similar to the sedges talked about previously. So those are some of the conditions here.
I'll show you there's the perspective
what it will essentially establish is the appropriate screening from the site as a result of the slope, right? So you get the 2 to 3 feet, you're screening the improvement, right? But allowing the maintained access to the non-conforming structures. You provide your vision and access corridor that's establishing where the common element and where the paths are appropriate. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. Carranza. Everyone, the public hearing is open. If anyone wishes to speak to the conditional uses requested by the Cedars, then please approach the podium, write your name and address, and speak your name and address for the record. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Chris Burrows. I am a resident of 213 Westlake Park Place, and I am the president of Cedars Management Corporation. I'd like to just take a minute to give you a bit of a brief background on the Cedars to help you appreciate our situation, as it's not a typical residential homeowner situation. We are a 501c4 or 7 nonprofit corporation. There's 29 homes and families represented to use this parcel. The property is approximately 1.5 acres. There's 400 plus feet of lake frontage. Approximately 25% of the property is occupied by a kettle used for stormwater retention for the city. Articles of incorporation state, dating back to the early 1980s, that the property is for exclusive benefit, and it's exclusive benefit as a park and a pleasure ground for the members. If the parcels were extracted into home sites, there would be about 6 home sites that would be on the side, just to give a perspective of the size. Cedars members are all vested in the protection of this property. Many of our members are participating in this meeting tonight, either here behind me or remotely. Cedars families have a diversity of ages who represent a wide range of interests for the property. We are currently, as a member association, working on project teams to address items like the maintenance of our boathouses, use of the property, plantings and vegetation, revisiting our bylaws which are antiquated and out of date, and other things. This project intent, as we started it, was to address two issues: kettle drainage from standing water and erosion at the shoreline. The shoreline that we're talking about is 60 feet of the total frontage, representing 15% of our total. We started with requests at the Cedars meetings dating back to 2017. The first thing we did was putting a path to the lake, and the reason for that was there was an existing path that went over a hill that was a fall hazard because of the loose gravel, and so that was changed. The center path was closed. We roped it off for a while and reseeded, and to intent to prevent erosion. In that time, we've worked with the city on kettle drainage issues. We have contacted Rock Lake Improvement Association about our kettle drainage dating back to 2019. And we've had other people in to work with us, like the former Jefferson County Park Supervisor, who took any interested Cedars members on a tour of our property, looked at invasive and non-native species, and helped us identify some of those for thinning and removal. I won't speak to the kettle project because it doesn't sound like that's in question, but I would be happy to if we need to. The focus, I think, is on erosion in the shoreline in this area. And I want to talk a little bit about why we moved forward and worked on this project. We needed a level access. It was pretty significant, steep, in different places. We wanted to have more of a level access to accessing the piers. There was no lower level boathouse access, and we rent those out to the members for both dues and improvements. And there was no way to get to the bottom of the far north boathouse. There was a tree growing into the boathouse foundation, both tipping towards the lake and pushing the foundation wall of the boathouse in. And it was truly impossible to access safely the lower level of that boathouse. The concrete apron for both the boathouse doors and the lower level weren't able to be opened because it had frost heaved and ice shoved so many times that we weren't able to get into them. Shoreline erosion was another big significant issue over the course of the last several years. Literally between May and July of this year, I think I provided pictures in the conditional use application. Between May and July of 2020, our pier fell in the water, and it was literally had been washed out from the shoreline erosion. Additionally, there was shoreline rolling of earth and undercutting, and the purpose of creating what we did was the members wanted additional seating in additional areas that they could share with their families. We also wanted our access to kayaking canoe storage outside. These have been accomplished. Unfortunately, the project was never completed. At this point, we feel the erosion issue is fixed. Our rock might look stark, but it wasn't finished. Beautification, which is subjective, is next. Many of the members were assessing the day the work was stopped next for plantings and beautification. Nothing down there has been done without quality and beauty in mind. Plans that were included in the conditional use application, the restorative components were conservative to get started. And the swale and shoreline intended to be done for this coming spring to prevent water damage that's likely to occur with the amount of snow and the thaw and frost in the ground are not complete, and we will likely have, depending upon the spring, that wash out again. I think that kind of concludes some of the things that I wanted to say at first, but we would like to proceed, and I think that we would like to proceed with what we had proposed in our response. It was a little bit of a surprise to us, and in fairness, I don't know that all of the members got a chance to read the response that came 5 days ago on Thursday, and there was no chance to gather any feedback to the change in our proposal, which was significantly greater than the proposal originally presented to us by Patricia Cicero. We never intended to have all sedge grass over the knoll. It's not what the members wanted, and it takes away a lot of the seating in the common area places that we strived in this year with COVID really used. Again, being 15% of our shoreline, the rest of it is completely native, overgrown, and yet more things to work on restoration. I don't feel that we're talking about the erosion prevention at this point. We feel we have those issues we have other things to address, and we would like to continue with what the members had in mind with plantings and the restorative work to the wall. That's what I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Burrows. Did you identify people online, Mr. Foster?
Just the two I mentioned, Patricia Cicero and Mary Mays.
All right. Ms. Cicero, Mike Foster noticed you online. Would you like to speak at this time? Ms. Cicero, Mike Foster noticed you online. Would you like to speak at this time?
Again, I'm Patricia Cicero, Director of the County Land and Water Conservation Department. I just want to start by saying, giving you a little bit of background, the National Lakes Assessment identified the loss of shoreline vegetation as the #1 stressor to our lakes. A shoreline with native plants can prevent pollutants from being carried by rainwater from reaching our lakes. The Cedars conditional use permit is before you today because they violated the city's rules and went ahead with a number of items before getting any permits. On August 21st of last year, a concerned citizen called me about the work being done on the property. I then went to the property and talked to both Steve Homan and Heidi Burrows. I asked them if they had a permit for the work. They said they didn't need one, and was told that they had read the city rules. I then asked if they called the city because I know a lot of the rules are sometimes hard to find, and I was informed that they did not call the city. I encouraged them to contact the city before any more work was performed so that they would be certain that they were following the rules. I don't think they did that until the following week, but I'm sure the city could respond to that. I have personally gone to the Cedars property several times since that first visit, including a meeting with Cedars property owners to discuss the property and impacts to the lake, a September meeting with Cedars members, city personnel, and consultants, and a Department of Agriculture engineer to talk about the kettles, the drainage, the shoreland area. And then there was a separate September meeting with a few Cedars members to identify native and non-native plants. I drafted notes from these September visits that the city reviewed, which provided a summary of the discussions and recommendations relating to the kettles, the drainage, an unused well, the shoreline, and the shoreland area. These notes provided a number of possible solutions and steps on all of the issues. These notes were sent to all the Cedars members as well as the city, and I'm happy to provide those notes to anyone who's interested. I did not provide any vegetative plan recommendations to the Cedars. I didn't do any detailed plans for them. In the application materials, there's an email between Steve Homan and the DNR. I just want to talk about this a little bit because it's the case that the shoreline rock called riprap, the rock that's right along the water's edge, that was placed at the site did not require a DNR permit as long as the riprap followed a list of specific exemption requirements. One of the items states riprap does not reach, that the riprap can't reach an elevation higher than 36 inches above the ordinary high water mark. So the DNR was only giving permit guidance on riprap that that cannot exceed 36 inches above the ordinary high water mark. Therefore, all of the work above the rock riprap is not under the jurisdiction of the DNR, but is under the jurisdiction of the city. Just wanted to clarify that. In terms of the proposed rock swale that is partially built, it is my opinion and the opinion of the Department of Agriculture engineering technician that the rock swale will negatively impact the lake by delivering sediment-laden water directly to the lake. Instead, there were two options that were proposed, including a French drain and a turf reinforcement mat. Both of these options would involve removing the rock swale. In addition, the erosion that is happening is when the water travels over their walking path, which is a gravel path. A vegetative berm along with some shaping of the land near the top of the slope would prevent water from washing out the path. These options are more environmentally and visually appealing than the rock swale. I propose that a condition of the permit be to remove the rock swale and replace it with a more environmentally friendly and visually appealing solution. Please note that the city's memo only provides feedback on the rock swale because that was the only option in the application. It is my understanding that the city's memo is not saying that the rock swale is better than the other options available to the applicant. I agree with the city staff's opinion that the proposed replanting plan is not sufficient to accomplish the screening requirements of the rules. In addition, the proposed plan will not mitigate the negative impacts to the lake of all of the hard surfaces that were installed. Water will run off the site very easily over the rocks and into the lake. Some impacts could include increased water temperatures that negatively impact fish, increased sediment delivery that negatively impacts fish and other animals in the water, as well as increased nutrients that can lead to algae and nuisance aquatic plant growth. And it is my experience that the Group A areas that the consultant for the city put forward recommended a vegetative restoration should include removal of the rock. In their memo, they said either the rock can be removed and planted, or there could be planting medium put over the rock and planted. But I don't think if you don't remove the rock, I don't think that the success of the planting will be assured. I think it'll be really hard for those plants because of the rock that's there. The city rules state the following. The shoreline shall be vegetated with ground cover in all areas within 10 feet of the ordinary high watermark within the vision and access corridor, and with the exception of areas covered with boathouses, stairways, and paths providing access to piers. This item should also be considered when determining if the current plan or a future plan meets the city's rules. Erosion control on the site will be very important because of the steep slope and being adjacent to the lake. Erosion control, such as a silt fence, should be properly installed upslope of the shoreline riprap prior to any disturbance to the site, including removal of the rock or addition of soil on top of the rock. Furthermore, the erosion control should be inspected and maintained until the project has been completed and all bare soil is covered with mulch or landscaping fabric. It is unfortunate that this work went forward without the proper permits, and I'm also worried about precedents in this case. If the rock placed above the shoreline and the rock swale is allowed to be kept with the minimal planting that the application contains, then why wouldn't other property owners do the same thing without permits? This would be a detriment to both the health of the lake and to scenic beauty. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Cicero. Did you see Mary Maves? Mary Maves, if you are there, Mike Foster noticed you online that you wish to speak. Mary Maves, do you wish to speak at this time?
Thank you. I'm Mary Mays. I'm from Lake Forest, Illinois, but I'm a regular visitor to Lake Mills. And I encourage you and thank you for upholding Lake Mills's codes and ordinances that protect the beauty and the health of Rock Lake. The economic health of the city and the spirit of the city depend on the health and beauty of Rock Lake. The long-term health of the lake and the greater good need to take precedence over the personal preference and quick fixes that your ordinances and codes try to take rule over for the sake of the lake. I encourage you to require adherence to the Mead and Hunt memorandum planner for remediation of the Cedars site, which would comply then with the Lake Mills City codes and ordinances. The planner memorandum appears to require additional approval if or when a swale would be built to drain water into into Rock Lake, which is, of course, always a very much a concern to have outside waters coming in. The memorandum states on page 7, it is important that the design and construction of the swale is evaluated and approved by the city's engineers and public works staff to ensure no impact to the function of the existing kettle system upstream, and as you mentioned, as a source of pollution and detritus to the lake. So that swale would need additional approval according to the memorandum. It appears that continued City of Lake Mills Planning Commission oversight will be needed for this project, as it is a very large one, until all aspects of this remediation are designed, approved, and completed. Thank you for protecting Rock Lake for the people of Lake Mills and all the others that come to enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maves. Is there anyone else online who wishes to speak at this time? Is there anyone present here who wishes to speak to this request? If so, please, again, write your name and address and then state your name and address for the record.
Again, John Cody, representing the Rock Lake Improvement Association. We appreciate the level of detail provided by the city's consultants with regard to the city ordinances and what modifications can and cannot be undertaken along the shoreline and within the associated vegetative zone. We would like to see the restoration and mitigation steps offered by that report to be those that are required by this commission and city staff. We'd like a viewing access corridor to be established and codified within this approval process. The viewing access corridor allows certain behaviors such as cutting, clearing, placement of piers, paths, and walkways, which by establishment prohibits them in other areas. Further, we note that establishing vibrant native plantings in the area that have been heavily hardscaped takes significant effort. To ensure the success of those plantings, it's probably necessary that the stone be removed rather than a planting medium placed over the top of that stone, as was referenced in that report. The cedars should receive guidance from shoreline restoration professionals familiar with native plants due to the possible damage that has been done through soil compression, soil removal, shaping, and the construction process. The Cedars should be required to submit a comprehensive planting plan in compliance with the consultant's recommendations and the city's ordinances, and a commitment by the organization to maintain the native plantings for a period of years. We'd like to request that the city perform the 1 and 2 year inspections pursuant to the prior and earlier CUP approval that was taken on by this commission. We'd also request that the city attorney obtain a copy of the covenants, easements, and restrictions if they exist with regard to that property, and ensure that any modifications proposed are not only following the city ordinances, but are also within the stipulations of the covenants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. Would anyone else like to speak to the request by the Cedars?
Brandy Broskowski-Duro, and I live at 204 Westlake Park Place. I'm a member of the Cedars, and I'm also a concerned citizen of Lake Mills and in the state of Wisconsin. I'm here tonight because I find that after doing the extensive work that was done at Cedars and then requesting to have a conditional use permit post-destruction, very troubling when we have city codes established for the reason to preserve the lake shore and lake shoreland, so it's not going to be causing damage not only in our present time but for future generations. And if we don't abide by the city codes that are in place for a reason, then we are not being held accountable to what we should be responsible for. And it's because as a nonprofit organization and the Cedars organization voting to do something, in our bylaws, it strictly states that we are not to do anything that's against the law. I find that violating codes and not checking if we need permits to be against the law. A couple members did raise this concern, and we were assured by those pushing ahead that we didn't need permits, when in actuality we did. And when Patricia came to the site and asked them to hold off and to contact the city, they pushed ahead anyway, and now we have this situation as it sits. And this all could have been avoided. These things could have been done in a proactive way to have the permits granted ahead of time, or at least input given by the Plan Commission on what's allowed and what's not allowed. So having said all that, there are the violations that are present, and I do have a very extensive pictorial history of the site, and I have submitted that for the Plan Commission to review. And I'm hoping that all of you have a chance to look at it or can look at it later to see the details. And if anyone else was interested, I'd be glad to share that. The thing that really is troubling is the vision corridor. And as Brian, I appreciate your comments about not having an established vision and access corridor. But having said that, it's not only do we have the 30 feet that has been there at least since 2016 on images, you can see it, but what was done and what was all taken out extends 69 to 80 feet if you count that solo boathouse and then the destruction that was done on the north side of that as well. So it's a very expansive area. And the point starts to become, well, saying that we did this for erosion control when the bank was being held quite strongly by all the plants that had really deep roots that we have pictures of that shows what was taken out of there. When that was taken out, and then we put in this rock and gravel, the trail leading down has to have some diversions built into that because that's just going to pour down. And that already after 3 rainfalls showed signs of channels being formed. So if we're doing measures to try to say we're controlling erosion, but what we put in is causing more erosion in the long run, that's really going against what the original plan was in the first place. So I really appreciate the details of the plantings that were provided by Mead Hunt in their report, and I strongly support the idea of removing the retaining rock wall because it's created quite the death zone. It's just a pile of rock, nothing in it. It's not a substrate that things are going to grow in. And to try to plug things into that, we're probably going to be wasting money because in the long run, they're not going to survive. So if we would remove the majority of that rock that's outside of the 30-foot vision and access corridor that's already all stone and rock too, so that's going to remain that 30 feet, then the rest of it could be replanted and done in a way that is providing beauty for the area and providing what's needed for a healthy habitat. We need to have people who have training in ecology coming in, giving advice, and that's what Patricia Cicero did, and she even gave us names to contact in order to do these kind of things, but it just wasn't considered important. And the fact that so much hardscaping construction was done with that amount of materials brought in, up above the Cedars, a new parking lot basically was made, compacted gravel, and I say that some of that is causing some of the flow and drainage into that kettle because now that water is it's on an impervious surface, so it just sits there and has to flow someplace. So that combined with the the maintenance done on the south kettle, and it's working efficiently, and then so we have extra water coming in, but combined with that impervious surface of that huge parking lot that was made for whatever reason, I don't know, and then the whole area of that north kettle was stripped and the berm was stripped. Some of it was planted nicely with some native plants, but the west side of it was just grass. So if we go in and restore it with some vegetative berms, that can control the way the water is going to flow out of the north kettle, and we don't need the rock swale. My third and last point is the south end of Cedars. Now that people are starting to eye that up, saying we have to go in and do all this work there. That's been looked at also by Patricia Cicero. That's in the report, the conditions that are there. And I'm from the perspective, again, for people in the future, please don't allow that to end up destroyed and looking like what happened in the north side of the Cedars. And I humbly ask you to please put a 2-year moratorium on the rock swale so we can at least have the opportunity to try the alternatives that are available so we can really see what works. This whole thing with the North Kettle, it's a new thing that's occurred in the last 2 years. So we're just getting a grasp of what's happened and what's contributing to it. And we don't really have a definite certainty that putting that rock swale is all going to solve it. It's severing tree roots when we're cutting down into those channels. And it, just from a side point to say a certified herbalist has said how damaging that is to the longevity of trees if you're severing their roots. Even if they're surface roots, those trees really rely upon that. So I don't want to be doing more damage by trying to rectify things we think we're fixing when we're not fixing them. The state archaeologist has also asked that we continue to keep a 10-foot buffer around a linear earthwork that's been identified as a possible burial site, and that's not factored into any of these things. And so there's a worry about if we cut that big channel for the rock swale of slumping happening with the burial site as it sits. So that's what I have to say, and thank you so much for listening.
All right, thank you, Mr. Earl. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this request?
I'm Carol Burrows, 169 Westlake Park Place, current Secretary Treasurer of the Cedars. And more than that, I have been, and then I can't seem to write and
I have the same problem.
do what we need to do here. I have been familiar, not lived on the street for about 30 years, but have been connected with it via other relatives of mine. And I have lived there for about 20 years and been a member of the Cedars. Brandy just said that the North Kettle was something new. In 2008, my grandson and I helped direct the water because it was completely filled when we had our huge water problem in 2008. there were branches rolling around in there. We had to get out and we drained a pathway so it could get to the lake, exactly where the swale should be. The fact that we think it should be, I think it should be there. There is another point I'd like to bring up is a viewing corridor. I had never heard that term, and maybe I just never needed that term. But when I think of it by definition, and maybe that's the teacher of me, my background, I think of a viewing corridor as if I had a home that I could look out the window or open the drapes and there would be the lake. No one in Cedars has that ability. I know that you have not all had the opportunity to walk down there. It's a very unusual piece of the lake property. It has been there since it was given to the Cedars Corporation, the 29 homes that have access there by Mr. Ferry, who also then gifted land for Lakeside Lutheran to the city, or to them to use as a school. A couple of things, just points as I've been sitting here listening to speakers. I appreciate what Project Improvement has done for the city. However, in 2019, I wrote an email to Hope Oosdick and to Patricia Cicero asking for help. The city was working with the DNR. They were going to contact them. And it was during that time before the kettle was redone. The kettle was redone 2 years ago, was it? If Wayne's still on. They did a great job, but they were really struggling with how to maintain it and keep it going because it does fill up with sediment. So during that time, I reached out to Patricia and to Hope and sent an email asking for help. Said, what can we do? And the response I got from Hope was that, well, mosquitoes happen, so get some pellets, get those mosquito pellets. And Patricia, I think, asked the city for help, but I didn't hear back from her directly. And I know, I have all the pamphlets for the healthy lakes. I have all of that. Anybody that would think that I would harm the lake that I so love just doesn't really know me. And there's nothing we did purposely down there. And, as far as asking the city, well, in today's age, I think more people go online, look for their information, see what they can find, and that's what we go with. Are there any permits there? Do I apply online? Do I do this? Do I read the definition first? All of those things, yes. And we were stopped completely in the middle. We are working with a contractor who 3 of our homeowners have had work done, and that's why we chose Steve, because we know that the integrity that he has when he works. We know that we can count on his expertise. He grew up doing this. He can run an excavator like some of us could do a lawnmower. I mean, it's just no effort. He knows what he's doing. He also knows the land because he works with it all the time. And I hope Eric will come up and talk about, Eric has lived in the area and has more experience than I have. But there's nothing that we have done purposely to hurt things, or nor would we. I don't know if I have anything else. I guess that was pretty much it. I mean, I could go on for a long time, but okay. Just to say that I think that this whole thing has kind of been blown out of the water, so to speak. And it's gone beyond the membership voting between the records that have been kept 2017, 18, 19. We've talked about doing these things. And like any other thing that's all volunteer with very little money because we have not raised the membership dues. The boathouses that you see in all the pictures are the historic look of the icons of Lake Mills. Those are ours. This is private property we're talking about, and I think we've done a really good job. It's just been too bad that the feeling has changed this year with all of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Girls.
Hi, I'm Steve Holman, 410 College Street here in Lake Mills. Indeed, I am a contractor that was involved with this project. It's a little unfortunate that the Cedars and myself have been vilified by trying to circumvent any type of ordinances or whatnot. The Cedars organization with the 29 homes, there's a significant number of people there that are really good at their work and they understand codes and whatnot. And a lot of them people read the code. I was involved working with the Plan Commission. I've been on the Plan Commission over 20 years, and not that I wrote the code, but I was in oversight with all the other Plan Commission members. And when I read through it, I missed the part where it required us to get a permit. And a lot of the other Cedars members also read the code. So the other thing that's really important is through the course of the Plan Commission creating the code, we worked with RLIA for not 5 minutes, but 5 years in creating this code. So for anybody in Rock Lake Improvement to think that I personally would do something to harm this lake, I got my whole life here. I just turned 60, and I have 60 years vested in this place, and I certainly wouldn't do anything to harm the code, or the lake, I'm sorry. So anyway, back on topic. In regard to the magnitude of this particular project, this is not a major project. The work that was conducted by the lake was to restore basically ice push. So we removed the tree stumps that were taken and pushed forward and the trees that died. And we removed some invasive species. And I understand that there's some root forms, but they no longer were rooted. They were uprooted. And we just scraped out the excess of the materials that eroded down to the lakeshore, because when we were talking as a group, Eric Body's been, like Carol said, he's been here or at the Cedars for, I guess 35 years or more, and he remembers walking directly out of the lake with no rise. So that material came from above, and it was erosion that was down there. So when I took the material off of the lake, I think Chris has some pictures that he can put up and show, but the material was moved off and it exposed the substrate, which is sand and gravel, the existing sand and gravel that was there. So the riprap, it truly was not a DNR riprap project, because riprap projects end up being in the water, and they go out and they create a buffer zone and a place for the ice to lift and whatnot. But anyway, the rock that was put there was put on porous sand and gravel. So the comments made where it was hard pack and whatnot, you could put a hose there and it's impervious. The water just runs through and goes into the granular, and it's one of the best filtration systems that can go to the lake. Now there are other places on this site, on this 400 feet of frontage. It's so fortunate that this group of people considers this sacred ground, because if they were to subdivide this property, there's 400 feet of footage. At 60-foot lot minimums, I mean, that equates to at least 6 lots, which is 6 vision corridors and a bunch of permitted cutting. So they're not interested in doing that. They're interested in preserving what they have, but they have 29 families. And to say that they can't enjoy one little piece, there wasn't enough room there for one family. And now there's probably enough room for 3 families and a place to put the pier. So I just, some of the stuff that was said, it's in my opinion that it's not accurate. I think if they were to go and put additional plantings above the existing area that was preserved, they could do all kinds of stuff to remediate additional materials to migrate down by the lake and get in the lake. But there's all kinds of other going to the south. There's 300 plus feet of frontage that has extensive erosion potential, and that's where more focus should be. But in this particular case, the area in question here is minimal, and it's probably will stay for decades. One last thing in regards to the swale, it was since I had been, we haven't, obviously, because we had this project put on hold because of conditional use. There is potential for a French drain in the swale, and it's my estimation that I don't believe any material will end up entering the lake. I think it will go in the French drain area, and with a follow-up, a year from now, and to put some oversight in this, I think a lot of these questions will be answered. But for this to be blown out of proportion, and it's really unfortunate that we had to turn this into some sort of vilified situation. I think these people truly care about the lake. I truly care about the lake, and I would hope that the RLA would invite me to some meetings, because I'd like to learn more, because this is going to continue to come up, and we should really be on top of our game. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holt.
I'm Heidi Burrows, 213 Westlake Park Place. And the whole thing got out of proportion. First of all, it's not finished. The big concrete slab, that's not supposed to be there. That was a construction site. I mean, even when the whole project was done that night, Cedar members were saying, we need some foliage, we need some greenery. A bunch of people were saying we could put stuff here, we could put stuff there. But what is being portrayed is, this is what we like, this is what we want. The whole shoreline was going into the water. Where were you guys when we needed you? We would have loved to have somebody tell us, this is what we'd like you to do. We noticed your shoreline is going in. Let's have you do this. But now it's after the fact, and we're being just desecrated. And I just don't think that's right. We are doing whatever possibly we can to preserve the shoreline, to preserve all of the cedars. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mrs. Burrows.
Good evening. My name is Phyllis Lindloff. I live at 520 Westlake Park Place. I just want to make 2 or 3 comments. First, my husband and I have been in Lake Mills for since 2016, so we are very new to the whole lake frontage, vision and corridor access, all these terms, riprap. I didn't even know what that was a year ago, but so we're very new to all of this. So what I'm going to say may pertain to your decision, may not. The first thing I want to say is that when we first moved in 2016, the pathway, if you would call it that, from the upper part of the property down to the lake was grassy. When it was wet out, it was muddy, it was slippery. There were tree roots above ground that were trip hazards. And so if you were anyone with any sort of, I don't want to even say disability, but even age, you couldn't get down there safely at all. And now that we put in this gravel pathway and we've leveled out the area down by the shore and we put in these steps down to the pier, now my 78-year-old mother can come when she visits and she can safely get down to the lake, which is wonderful. She could not do that before. So the improvements that we've made in my opinion, have benefited us because it benefits my mother, and I'm sure it probably benefits a lot of other residents and their visitors as well. And then I just want to say that we are a nonprofit. So as I sit here and I listen to ideas of ripping out the rock we've already put in and whatnot, I think, where is that money going to come from? And how soon are we going to be able to do that realistically? Because there's a lot of outstanding bills still with this project, and to add on to that could be detrimental. And so I just want to sort of throw that out there that, that, you know, we are a nonprofit. We don't have outrageous HOA fees, thank God. And, you know, we appreciate that. And so I just want to put that out there that it has, our improvements that are out there have definitely been improvements and have helped us greatly. So as long as you know that. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chris Gensler. I live at 116 Westlake Park Place. I've been a member of the Cedars for the past 15 years. I've enjoyed it with my family. I have 3 small children. We use it quite extensively. We take up a lot of that room that's limited down there. I would like to thank Steve for the work that he did do down there. It did make it more accessible. It made it nicer for the families. It made it more usable. It also made it safer. I have placed those piers with the help of the members for the past 15 years myself, and you can literally see the shoreline every year. We're working back. This year, there was a significant gap after it raining for the rain that Chris had talked about. It washed it out. It was gone. We had to move it all back. These were real things that were occurring. We all met as a group. Steve did a nice job of laying out what the plan would be. And I feel that based on some of the things you're hearing tonight, you're being misled as to what our goals are. Our goals are to maintain it along with the boathouses that are historic. It's 400 and about 25 feet long. We're only using a small section of it. Our concerned member has pointed out different areas of it, I think, to mislead you. The parking lot she's referring to is gravel and debris from the construction job that is not done yet. It is to be removed. It'll make it more usable. Our kettles that are there, the southern one is working well, but we get a lot of standing water in the northern one. Our trees are dying rapidly from the chronic water. It overruns. It comes down our path, and we can see it eroding. Steve was doing a nice job of correcting that, and that got put on hold. So we'll see where we're at this spring. But I do think that this can be remedied with our current project. And I would like to point out, as the previous member did, the funds are somewhat limited, so we have to do things in steps. We do try to do them correctly. So if you would be willing to work with us to allow us to make it nicer in the rate that we could do it, I would appreciate it. That's all I had to say. Okay.
Well, I'm going to try to talk and write at the same time. My name is Eric Body. I write it and say it. It makes it a little bit easier. I live at 212 West Lake Park Place. I've been a member of Cedars for over 35 years. Now, what I want to talk about is sins of our fathers. And that has to do with why those boathouses are there, why it is the way it is, and how our parcel of land actually used to be in the township of Lake Mills. And it was inherited by the city of Lake Mills. And ever since then, we've been trying to make the best of a bad situation. Make no mistake of it, it's a bad situation. Now, what hasn't been mentioned tonight, and I'm going to try not to mention anything that's been mentioned before, in the essence of stating a little bit of time, is there's a drainage ditch for the water, the rainwater to drain in. It's an 18-inch pipe coming in. You can imagine how many thousands of gallons of water come through that pipe in the heavy rains, and we've had historic rains in the last couple of years. That has created problems down there. We have the perfect storm of water coming down the hill and water coming from the lake, wrecking our lake shore. It's a perfect storm of everything, and we're doing our damnedest to try to save it. The city has worked with us very successfully over the last 30-some years, from when I worked with Gene Stolzmark, an old city manager here from over 30 years ago, for the original kettles. And since then, Steve Wilkie and Dwayne and the others through the city have helped us maintain and repair the kettles that we have. And there is still an issue with some water getting down to the lake in the heavy rains. We almost had that issue fixed. We were probably within a day of having that issue fixed if work hadn't stopped. Now, the city can decide if they want to run a pipe right into the lake. They probably would never do that, but we've been trying to avoid that for years. We have a solution to that at our grasp right now. We need to continue with that to get that taken care of. That's the swell problem. If it doesn't work out with what we propose to do, we can revisit it in a few years if it doesn't seem to be working. But you got to consider that a few plants aren't going to do anything when you have an 18-inch pipe dumping water in our area. It's not going to do it. A few little plants and a few roots are not going to stop it. Now, as far as the rest of the stuff, those trees that we took out this last couple of years that were on the shore were dead and dangerous and falling. If I had little kids down there, I was not going to want them near those trees. They had to come out. And then also, the bushes that we took out, they definitely were wrecking one of the boathouses. And we took on that obligation to save those boathouses about 15, 20 years ago for the benefit of Cedars, the benefit of history, the benefit of the city. So we have that obligation to save those boathouses. We have the obligation to save that shore. We're not going to damage anything. Now, I'm interested in, if you want to call it this, interest-based problem solving. Let's be realistic. It's not realistic to take out those rocks. They're the best answer for what we have to do right now. They're the best answer for what we have. More plantings there? Yes, that matters. Give us a chance to come up and do the plantings and revisit it in a year or two to see if you like what we've done. If you don't like what we've done, we can talk about it again. Don't put onto us an excessive financial burden that could really hurt us and tear us apart as an organization. I cannot count the hours I've put in the last 35 years now. A tremendous amount of hours to make that place better. And I don't want to see those hours go on to waste by a short-sighted decision with people that aren't involved in Cedars. I want you people to make the decision so we at Cedars can do with your approval what we need to do to save that area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden.
The public hearing is still open. Does anyone else wish to speak to this request?
I have video and pictures of anything that you'd like to see down there if anyone would help.
I do too.
Well, that may be something that we would perhaps have an interest in under discussion. Now, does anyone else wish to speak to this request? Does anyone else wish to speak during this public hearing? Is there any other further testimony for this particular public hearing? All right, hearing none, we move on to item number 8, discussion and recommendation on conditional use request from Cedars Management Corporation for the purpose of an alternative vegetative cutting plan to exceed the 30-foot limit under the current shoreline preservation and vegetative buffer requirements, and for the purpose of filling and grading on a slope greater than 20% within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark at the Cedars as set forth in the recorded plat of Lake Park Place. Plan Commission members, we have before us motion 2122, Cedars Management Corporation, the Cedars, conditional use permit for alternative shoreline vegetation cutting plan and conditional use permit for grading within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark. This motion sets forth the city zoning authority under Wisconsin state statutes, the city zoning code 660-34 on shoreline preservation, vision and access corridor. The city zoning authority, the city zoning code 660-35 on filling, grading, lagooning, dredging, and excavating permitting for grading within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark. The Cedars have 3 parcels and it includes historic non-conforming structures and uses outside of the afforded vision and access corridor and along the shoreline. The Cedars application for conditional use under 660-34B4 for Alternative Vegetation Cutting Plan for shoreline vegetation replanting and remediation. The Cedars conditional use request under section 660-35B for grading at a slope greater than 20% within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark. Review by city staff. Tonight's public hearing and review by city council. This motion provides for a plan commission recommendation to the city council to grant the requested conditional use permits for alternative shoreline vegetation cutting plan and grading of a shoreline slope at or exceeding 20% within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark, subject to the following conditions. 1, the recommendations and conditions outlined in the planner's memo. 2, compliance with applicable state law, administrative code, and local ordinances. And there are some similarities with the last set. This is a more unique situation, so the conditions, the list is going to be greater than the last case. The conditions of approval that were listed: A, Alternative Vegetative Cutting Plan. 1, planting plan showing intended plantings, quantities, and locations approved by city staff. 2, additional vegetation removed as a result of the installation of the stone-lined swale shall be approved by city staff and may require replacement if deemed contributing to the scenic beauty, erosion control, and screening of the site. 3, landscape fabric for erosion control placed on disturbed soil until the plantings establish appropriate ground coverage. B, filling, grading, lagooning, dredging, ditching, and excavating. 1, the smallest amount of bare ground shall be exposed for as short a time as feasible. Erosion control measures as outlined in section 660-143 shall be observed. 2, temporary ground cover shall be used and permanent cover shall be planted. 3, diversion, silting basin terraces, and other methods shall be used to trap sediment. 4, fill shall be stabilized according to accepted engineering standards. 5, fill shall not restrict a floodway or destroy the storage capacity of a floodplain. 6, any additional technical requirements recommended by the city engineer and public works staff. And that's the proposed motion. Planning commissioners, do you have any questions or comments? Is there a wish to add a condition as the last one for review, annual review?
Yeah, I will. I will make that in a minute here. I'm just going over some of the notes and some of the questions I asked of the planners as we were hearing from everybody on this issue. So it does sound like something was missed in the process, and it's something that it looks like we as a plan commission need to take up as a future agenda item to make sure that our planning documents direct people to what they truly need to do. That's something we need to take up because now we know there's a shortfall in there somewhere. So asking some other questions, some things came to light, and I'm talking about view and access corridors and stuff like that have been mentioned here just about a half an hour ago or so. So trying to figure out what truly applies to that area that might not apply to other areas or vice versa. So one of the things that did come to light that is this site was developed well prior to our current code. So a lot of things that we have in our current code have never been applied down there just because it was built up way before that. And then when you talk about vision and access corridors, my understanding of the city's adaptation of vision and access corridors, along with what the state and counties have, is it's intended for properties. It's not intended for properties with multiple pre-existing boathouses without real houses there. But shoreline cover does apply. So I've seen pictures of before, I've seen pictures of after, I've seen pictures of families down there enjoying the different areas. And I am a big proponent of ownership rights and being able to do certain things on your property as long as they are within the guidelines of the rules and regulations that have been set out before you, and understanding that your plan has not come to fruition and that it's only partly done sort of adds an extra little piece onto this that really makes me want to say, while we have all these extra conditions or conditions of approval in there, we could really drop a lot of those conditions of approval to say that the Cedars works hand in hand with the staff planners to make sure your plan, when it comes to finalizing the final plan, whether that's a year or 2 years or whatever it is when you can afford it, would be one of the better conditional conditions to put on this. At least that's my take on it. Throwing all these conditions in here, while it's good, you still need to work with somebody. And I just think it's much simpler to say that in creation of the plan to complete the work at the Cedars, the work is done in conjunction with the planners to make sure that all rules and regulations are followed based on that property. So that's my take on it. And I asked a couple other questions, and I thought that maybe, I think it was 660-195N, paragraph 2, I thought would cover some of the issues that we have discussed about following up and making sure that the work is done according to the way it's expected to be done in the conditional use. But while it does help us with that, I still think that we would need to make that amendment to put a couple of years in there to review the project year after year just to make sure that things are moving the way they're supposed to. And if they're working in conjunction with the planners, I don't see that we're going to have a lot of problems with that. I do see some of the issues that you've talked about with the kettles down there and the draining and not understanding how that path is built in there and if it's going to affect it or not. That's something I can't really talk about or relate to, but that's why we have the experts over there. So that's my comments.
All right, thank you. All right.
I don't know if the other folks have anything.
Mr. Coots and Mr. Grady, do you have anything that you want to comment on or ask a question?
Yeah, I did have one. I just want to clarify. Sorry, I just lost my spot here. I just want to clarify that if this is one of the conditions or not, it's part of the planner's memo in Figure 12 and the vegetative restoration plan that talks about only leaving 3 or 4 feet of riprap at the bottom. Is that one of the conditions that we are that we are putting out here?
The memo does not state that, but I'm not sure precisely where that was, but
I'm looking on page 11, directly underneath Figure 12.
yes,
It does say that, yeah.
So I think that's more relative to in this certain circumstance, it's hard to precisely state, exactly how much 3 to 4 was an estimation in part, because as you see, there's a riprap and there needs to be some sort of vegetative restoration in front of the path. So precisely how they accomplished that, this was again intended as a conceptualization, with 3 to 4 feet being a rough estimate. With that said, there's certainly more review needed as part of a comprehensive plan as they submitted. So that would be addressed and considered as part of that.
Okay, but the intent of the plan here is that there's a little bit of riprap at the bottom on the shoreline, and then the rock is removed the rest of the way up for the vegetative planting.
So what's proposed here is either or as a potential, option for the Plan Commission to consider. The 3 to 4 feet, now that I'm looking at this, is in reference to the height that would likely be required of any plantings in front of that to provide the kind of screening that the condition requires. Based on the slope, it's an estimation of approximate height of planting, not a specific dimension related to the riprap itself.
So let's try and get to the question, Greg. In one form or another, they have to screen that riprap the way the code is constructed, I believe. So what he's saying is they can either reduce the height or figure out how to get something in there to screen it. Are you suggesting some other condition?
No, sorry, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, just trying to figure out what's in there. And I think I have that now. So thank you very much.
Just again to clarify, the conceptualization that's provided is a recommended restoration. It's again a conceptualization to try to bring together some of these themes in a visualization so that we can address them and look at them a little bit clearer than through word. And obviously there's some complexities here, so that was the intent there. And again, it would be for the Cedars to come to staff with a proposal of, how they meet some of the recommendations here,
All right, thank you, Mr. Coots. Mr. Grady, did you have anything you want to ask about?
I mean, I guess my one question, I don't know how if we could open this back up, but I'm interested to know, like, what are some of the recommendations that are in this that could potentially financially problematic for the organization? But what are some of the things that could potentially overwhelm them financially?
Mr. Grady, this is Dustin Wolf. If I can add to that, it's a little difficult for us to answer that because we don't know their financial situation, right? What we're asking is to remove or remediate certain areas that they came in and filled with rock or stone of some type to try to meet the intent of the ordinance. The issue here isn't that they wanted to make changes, it's that maybe only one person knows what the plan is. Maybe it's the person operating the machine, maybe it's somebody standing next to the machine, but it's not communicated to the groups that need to approve it. So first and foremost, we need a plan. This is our interpretation, meaning the planner and the landscape architect's interpretation of what could be done to meet the code out there. The cost associated with that, while we feel is minimal, because it's either minimal removal of existing rock or planting or putting medium within it and planting on top of it, I think that would be a minor expense. But it's very difficult for us to say what would be a financial hardship for this group. If they had brought a plan to us that said, this is what we want to do before we go out there and start bringing in stone and correcting the issues, and no one's saying they shouldn't be able to do those things. The issue is we need a plan that says, this is what we want to do. Then we can evaluate that in relation to what the code says. And we can then tell them where we feel it does or does not align with what the code requires. But right now, we're kind of all shooting from the hip. We're trying to take what improvements they made and say, well, that doesn't apply in our opinion. And so we need to remove areas of it. And that's what we're showing in this figure and what we're calling for. At the end of the day, we still need them to come back with a detailed plan that someone can discern elevations and quantities and plantings, right? A plan that I'll turn to the engineers who are on here. An engineer can look at and can determine that that's what's being built and graded to ensure that there's positive drainage out there. And that a bit of transparency is involved here, that everybody knows what to expect is going to be constructed out there, rather than a contractor being out there putting in stone based on his many years of experience in addressing these types of situations, because we don't know where or what is going in next. So I can't tell you what's financially difficult for this group till they give us a plan that says this is what they want to do, and then a cost can be put to it.
Thanks, Dustin. I think I've been in this for what, a year now. It seems like a lot of these folks are just really good people. They're doing their best. It seems like there's also a lot of expertise out there as well that we want to make sure gets heard. And I think, like, what I'm hearing you say, Dustin, is that we just need to see that communicated, that's going to be taken.
You are actually absolutely correct. That's what we need.
So my question then is, could we reword condition 1 to say the petitioner will follow the recommendations outlined in the planner's memo and provide a final plan or something to that something along those lines?
To
Dustin? Instead of saying you have to follow what's in the planner's memo, I wanted to say something that we want them to come back using the planner's memo and come back with a plan. Yeah, and that's, so I could replace number one in the sorry, I'm dying here, the motion, it's been a long day, to read, the petitioner shall use the planner's memo as a guideline to provide a plan to the city staff for review and recommendations.
I'm gonna. Can I add something here? I'm looking at this and listening to it. I have a real good idea of what Dustin's looking for and what it's probably going to cost, and it's probably pretty substantial and be a debate already on what the cost is. It's probably why we haven't got one to date, because I know Brian has worked pretty hard to get a plan in place. I think that from Dustin's and my standpoint, that would be the best thing. But you're going to have an engineer out there developing elevations. You're going to be putting together really precise drawings. And I know that when I see them, I'm always amazed at how much they cost, but that's pretty much the way of the world now. The question is, the second you do that, even before you get any construction done, you're going to have a pretty substantial cost in place. And so I know that they've been giving us some drawings, but again, Dustin's looking at them saying they really don't meet the intent of what we normally see or would like to see. And so that's kind of, how long are you going to give them to get us something like that? How detailed is it going to have to be? They're all going to be important, because really for Dustin and Brian and Dwayne and Brandon to make any decisions, someone's got to go out there and kind of put those pieces of information together.
So what requirements do they have to follow in order to say here's a plan that can be reviewed? If you understand what I'm saying, if we told them to go out and do this, what regulations do we have to show them to say these are the regulations that it falls under, and this is what we need to see in order to work with this to approve this conditional use?
You want to answer that, Dustin?
So we have in the code that says you have to provide plans of sufficient detail. We go short of saying that you have to have stamped engineering plans in some cases, but you have to provide sufficient detail that can clearly discern the improvements to meet, so existing conditions, proposed improvements, and to satisfy whether it's the engineer or the planner that we understand what's going to be built out there, and we understand how it's going to impact this property and how it will not negatively impact other properties. So the city has always provided a bit of latitude when it comes to that. So I'm not going to go out there and say they've got to shoot every grade out there. Now, Dwayne might have a different approach because he's an engineer. But if we had a plan that showed topography, an understanding of topography, and had some level of scale and kind of spatially context component to it, so we can determine where riprap is going to be and how far in it's going to go and how high it's going to be above the water, and then where the paths are going to be and where areas of vegetation are going to be, because we don't have that. We don't have that at this moment.
I think that's kind of Oh, go ahead. Let me know when you're ready.
No, that's all I want to say. It's just we need more detail than we have. We aren't building skyscrapers here, but we certainly need more than a cocktail napkin sketch.
So under our code, specifically under 660-34, the vegetative removal alternative cutting plan, this is the verbiage. Alternative cutting plan, an alternative cutting plan allowing greater cutting than permitted under this section, and that's the 30-foot vision access corridor, may be permitted by the Plan Commission by issuance of a conditional use permit under 660-195 of this chapter. In applying for such a permit, the Commission shall require the lot owner to submit a scale drawing of the lot, including the following information: location of parking, existing structures, paths, and stairs located within the shoreline buffer and vision and access corridor, gradient of the land, existing vegetation, proposed cutting, and proposed replanting. The Commission may grant such a permit only if it finds that such special cutting plans comply with A and B from that section, which will not create undue erosion and provide substantial shielding of the water, from the water of dwellings, accessory structures, and parking areas, as we've discussed throughout this hearing.
Okay.
That is the standard that's in place. That is the law that needs to be complied with.
Okay. So some of that is still very subjective to who's reviewing it.
Well, it's
if they want more,
it's Plan Commission,
right?
The one that's issuing the permit. And with regard, so in this whole conversation, there's a code that applies to this circumstance, right? It is very obviously shoreland area. There is also a reasonableness argument here that just hasn't been brought up at all tonight, and quite frankly, it's very disappointing. Reasonable minds will differ at what an appropriate solution to this is. Reasonable minds will differ as to what compliance with the code is. So let's find something that works with regard to the situation at hand. The most disturbing part of this hearing, in my opinion, maybe I'm going on a tangent here, I don't think Cedars members should be feeling vilified. I think that's a misstatement at this point in the game. What we're looking for is a solution that not only benefits the Cedars as the homeowners or the property owners, but also the other interests that are out there with respect to the lake and the area around it. Compromise is the name of the game here. The ordinance sets out and establishes the process and the procedure with regard to satisfying this request and providing a conditional use permit. Let's go back and focus on that process, engage in appropriate submittals, come up with a plan that's reasonable and that works, and move forward with it. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to get to in our paragraph, or our condition 1. How do we get to that point, and what do we ask for?
For condition 1, could you not say the petitioner shall submit a revised plan consistent with recommendations and conditions outlined in the planner's memo? We're envisioning a process where the petitioner would be working in concert with the planning consultants anyway.
Yes.
So if you did that, I think that would work. So 1 would be the petitioner shall submit a revised plan consistent with the recommendations and conditions outlined in the planner's memo. 2, the petitioner shall comply with applicable state law, administrative code, and local ordinances. Well, that's the procedures that we talked about. Well, that falls in there. So without having to expand upon that, we know that covers it. And then if we want to have the annual review, then we can add that as a third condition, because you could have, are you looking at, again, would you look at a 2-year period after commencement?
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to get to with some of the other items in here, whether or not we would have to. But it sounds like the recommendation is we should put it in as a 2-year review, similar to what we did with the last conditional use.
So, we could then say staff shall conduct an annual review of the project area for a period of 2 years, with the initial review being 12 months.
I apologize to my fellow commissioners, but I can't hear what's being
Okay.
said at all. I'm
All
hearing
right.
maybe every third or fourth word.
Okay, all right. We're looking at a similar condition as we applied to the last case as a condition number 3, where staff shall conduct an annual review of the project area for a period of 2 years, with initial review being 12 months following commencement of work. Okay.
So I will make that amendment to modify number 1 based on your comments. Did you guys get that?
Yep. And adding number
And
3.
add number 3. And I would also like to suspend the rules to bring you back up.
Let's have a second motion to suspend the rules. Is
Yeah.
that okay? Or do
Yes.
you want to discuss first?
No.
Okay. Because otherwise, motion to suspend
We
and
got
have
it.
discussion and then motion to amend.
Nope, we got it. Let's do the motion to amend first.
All right, so, yeah, so you wish to move to modify the condition number 1 as we described, and then add condition number 3 for the review.
I made that motion.
Okay. Commissioners, Mr. Grady, Mr. Coos, did you hear his motion?
No. Unfortunately, no. It goes in, and all of a sudden, I couldn't hear, so I didn't hear that whole last statement, unfortunately.
All right. His motion, Mike Foster's motion, is to revise this Plan Commission motion, or to revise condition number 1 to read: the petitioner shall submit a revised plan consistent with the recommendations and conditions outlined in the planner's memo. So that would be a revision of condition number 1. His motion also put in the third condition, like in the last case, where number 3 would be: staff shall conduct an annual review of the project area for a period of 2 years, with the initial review being 12 months following commencement of work. Mr. Coots, Mr. Grady, did you hear that?
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Do either of you wish to second Mr. Foster's motion?
Yes, I will.
Mr. Grady. Mr. Grady has seconded. And
That was Coots.
No, Mr. Coots.
Mr. Coots seconded. Sorry. Mr. Coots has seconded. All right. Any discussion? Moved and seconded to make those amendments to motion 2122. All right. Hearing none, then we'll take a roll call vote on these amendments.
Mr. Grady? Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Coots? Ms. Lazarus?
Aye. All right. And then,
Yeah, before we vote on
okay,
it.
before we go on the motion, the amended motion, then you had something else, Mr. Foster.
Yeah, I'd like to suspend the rules to bring up the chair. What's your?
The,
Yeah.
Mr. Burrows here.
Yeah, I'd like to make that motion to suspend the rules to allow us to ask a few questions.
Mr. Foster has moved to suspend the rules to ask questions of Chris Burrows. Is there a second? Who seconded? Mr. Grady seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Go ahead. Mr.
Okay. So, yeah, understanding, I'm hoping you understand what we've changed or what we've asked. And really what we're just doing is asking you to work with the city staff to make sure that a good plan comes forward so everybody knows what it's going to look like in the end, and not doing it try to put undue stress or pressure on your financial situation. It's not like you have to do it right away, but I just wanted to make sure that you understood what we're asking. We're just asking you to look at the plan or the recommendations that were given on the planner's menu. Excuse me. It's been a long day. I'm sorry. In a planner's memo, and work on a finalized plan so they can review it and work with you to get the best use out of that property possible, while making sure that we're doing everything we can to preserve our lake.
Now, are you specifically talking about a vegetative remediation plan?
Yes.
Okay. Specifically vegetative remediation plan.
That's exactly
the
what...
memo establishes the 30-foot vision access corridor. The memo contemplates the non-conforming uses that are already in existence.
Right.
We are talking about vegetative remediation.
Yes.
Specifically. The two options that are presented to the Cedars in the planner's memo are that you vegetate on top of the existing riprap, or that you remove a layer or two of riprap to bring it down and then vegetate behind it. Is that accurate?
In the areas vegetative restoration A and
yeah, the two sections that you have there.
To provide the screening against conditions of screening, scenic beauty, erosion control obviously is met, but we want to keep that moving forward. So.
Yeah, and the biggest thing is to maintain it, manage it, maintain it based on the current Plan Commission regulations, and not to do more or less. Yeah, go ahead.
You're specifically talking about restoration A.
And B.
And B.
Okay.
So within the 35 feet.
The 35-foot shoreline buffer zone inland from the shoreline, from the ordinary high water mark.
Does that make sense, or is that going to cause undue, well, we're already at that point now. We just want to make sure that you understand what, once we vote on this, if we vote it in, what your job is to do. Does anybody have any other questions? Because we can, the rules are suspended right now, if anybody else.
Now, this is the vegetation, I totally get that. How are you guys feeling about the existing riprap and the swale? Now, keep in mind, the city has a lot to do with the swale, because the drainage water coming down, we work with them on that in the past. So, what about the water, this riprap and the swale? Are they going to be able to stay?
My understanding, that's not part of this right now, is that correct?
Correct.
Yes. And that'll be future planning?
The riprap, in a sense, is, because of the shoreline preservation aspect of this. However, the alternatives that have been presented in the planner's memo are pretty clear, in my opinion. The swale and the condition of the north kettle and the south kettle isn't really contemplated in this action.
No, but the drainage from it is, because it goes to the lake, that's directly related to what the city does in the street.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, I guess from my perspective and being out on site and the commentary that I've heard is that system is working. It may not be perfect, and there may be improvements that can be done in the future, but that system is working, and we have a plan to move forward with it.
And that's what we'd like to do. We got part of that plan was the French drain getting in the lake.
And we haven't seen a plan for that. That would be a nice thing to see.
The other option we have is to go back to you and say, fix it, meaning the city, because you have an easement to do whatever you wish to with that lake water from here to perpetuity. And it is your obligation to get that drainage coming in that big pipe down to the lake. That is the city's responsibility from a contract written 4 years ago. So I can
concerned about that, then I'm also concerned for the Cedars, so we don't walk out of here with any questions in our mind. I want to know what's happening to that riprap. Are you going to make us take it out or not?
You're talking about the riprap?
Along the shoreline.
What's that?
Or the drain?
Yeah, not for
For
the
the
drain.
swale.
For the stuff that's here. The rocks that
Do we have to take that out?
Not according to.
There are two options that are presented in the planner's memo, to my understanding, with regard to the riprap on the shoreline. One is to vegetate it on top of it. The other is to remove some of it and vegetate behind it. Is that accurate?
So behind the 5-foot path that's allowed for access, the riprap that's directly on the shoreline is, again, it's not city, it's DNR permitting, right? So as far as the riprap there, we do actually require in the code also any filling that is occurred, you have to put riprap to the bottom of it. So I think that's appropriate, but shown in the drawing here, I think it's clear you've got riprap to remain along the shoreline.
Yes.
Vegetative restoration in between that and any of the improvements beyond.
So you're primarily interested in a correct, good, sustainable vegetative plan away at the beginning of the shore and going to that 30-foot area.
35-foot barrier through the buffer zone, the only exception being the vision and access corridor.
Right. And that can
But the conditions obviously are considerations of screening. So again, the 3, screening.
We continue to work with the city on the overflow from the north cattle. That's a problem, and it will be a problem this year too. It was in other years. And we want to do what the city wants with that, but we want to make sure that we do what you guys want with that, meaning what Dwayne and the city crew want to do with the water, that they're obligated to do something.
And that's something I can work with Dwayne with? With the swell?
No, we're not really, I mean, this is a hearing on the other issues. We have made,
There's a lot of, I mean, what city staff would do, what the city planning commission and council are going to recommend are two totally different things. So I don't know that the conversation is that we have to do, that we would have to do something. But if we opted to, I think that you would probably do something pretty close to what was proposed. So if the council wants to do something, and the plan commission and the council want to do something different, that's up to them. But if we're doing it, we would construct it pretty much the way it's being proposed.
That's the way I read it as well.
I only bring that up because it was brought up by many people tonight, two separate issues, what's happening at the lakefront and what was happening with the drainage. That's the reason that I bring it up, is that I don't want to have anyone walk out of here with misconception.
No, makes sense. So yeah, this is basically like you said, the alternative shoreline vegetation, so making sure that it's, I don't want to say remediated. That's not what I want to say, because you guys haven't finished. We just want to make sure that you finish it based on the regulations. I guess that's the best way of putting it. Does that make sense?
Makes great sense. Thank
Yeah.
you for clarification.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ready to proceed with the amendment?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. We're now going to proceed with motion 2122 as amended. Is there a motion on the amended motion 2122?
I'll make the motion to adopt the amended motion 21-2-2.
Okay. Mr. Foster has moved to pass the amended motion 2122. Is there a second? Who seconded?
Mr. Coots.
Thank you, Mr. Coots. Mr. Coots seconded. Any further discussion? In that case, we'll proceed with a roll call vote.
Mr. Grady? Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Coots? Ms. Lazarus?
Aye.
Motion passed.
That brings us to number 9, recommendation for future agendas. Is there anything to note at this time? Fine. In that case, we go on.
Real quick, I think Mr. Foster's recommendation down the road of looking at some of these issues that keep coming up and how we can kind of work around them, I think that is something that I would like to talk about, especially if there is an opportunity when we have a down month and we don't have anybody bring anything to the table. It could be an opportunity to put that on the agenda and have a standalone item.
That's a good idea, Mr. Grady. We can do a review to see that the procedures, the trigger point for doing another procedure is clarified in the code.
Make sure I got them right. Thank you.
And that it's clear to both parties, the city and any applicant down the road. That's a good idea. Anything else that we should note for future agendas? In that case, we go to item number 10, adjournment.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Holman, second.
Second.
And seconded by Mr. Foster. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Disagree? Fine. We're adjourned.